Manon de Boer belongs to a generation of artists who, for the last 10 years or so, have been thinking deeply about what it means to experience cinema and film in a hyper-saturated world of media culture. Manon, among other artists, contemporary artists, are considering how to slow down our experience of looking and listening and watching the moving image. Manon is a founding member of a Belgian group of filmmakers called August Orts. It's a platform for creative dialogue and exchange that features other Belgian filmmakers, Anouk de Klerk, Sven Augustinian, Herman Hasselberg. And Manon's position in and participation in this group is exemplary, I think, of her deep engagement with the creative, intellectual life in her community. However, Manon's practice is singular in that she has, for the last 10 years or so, been hyper attentive to conditions of sound and the perceptual experience, but also the sensory experience of film. Central to Manon de Boer's work is the theme or the structure of portraiture. For the last decade, she's been working with artists, friends, conceptual thinkers and writers, modern dancers, experimental musicians, all who are part of her community in Brussels and its surrounding environs. And in each of these portraits that Manon has made, she is not only keenly attentive to the politics of these figures or their practice, their work, but the experience of, on film, of how a portrait reveals itself to you. Now, just in the last few years, Manon has shifted that focus from portraiture to musical compositions and dance. And this exhibition here at the Contemporary takes its focus on the particular ways in which Manon addresses image and sound. In this exhibition, called Between Perception and Sensation, you'll find, and I'm in a gallery now in which you'll find two of these films, you'll find 4 recent films of Manon's, each which address the structures of music and sound, and how a film's soundtrack can influence its structure. Now, typically when you see a film, you, in the movies or even some artist-made films, the soundtrack is often a peripheral part of your experience. It becomes ambient, it's environmental. For Manon, who is thinking very carefully and deeply about not only your perception of the image in front of you, but the sound too, and how the sound can influence your overall perception, and sound too as a sensation. Manon has constructed each of these films in different ways to focus on various ruptures and the presence, both the presence and absence of sound, and how that can influence what your experience is. In Dissonant, her most recent film, the film begins after a passage of just a blank white screen, an image of a dancer in a bare wood-floored dance studio. And for the first 2 minutes of the film, she is listening to the recording of a composition by the Brussels composer, early 20th century Brussels composer Eugène Issai. This is a performance that this quite well-known and acclaimed Belgian dancer hasn't performed herself publicly, but it's one that she knows deeply from her own background and experience in dance. And in the film, she listens for 2 minutes, standing still. So you have this very intense experience of listening to the music with her as you watch her listen. And then when the music stops, suddenly her body jerks back and she begins this dance. And what was the recording, and it's very powerfully felt recording as you watch and listen, is suddenly exchanged for just the sounds of the footsteps on the floor of the dance studio and this dancer's breathing. At another point in the film, the screen goes black, and what you hear, along with the sounds of her footsteps on the floor, is the sound of Manon, the artist, changing the film reels. She's shooting this in 16 millimeter, and you hear the mechanics of the camera change. And so what would be a very simple cinematic composition of a dancer in a dance studio becomes a very intricate and complex meditation on the ways that sound can influence what you're seeing in this performance, between the camera's presence as you hear her footsteps and the mechanics of the camera, but you can't see her, as you watch her listen to this Acai recording, and then as you watch her dance without music. It's an intricate and complex meditation on, and as in many of Manon's films, this relationship between perception, what you make of the forms that you see before you, and sensation, the experience of something that can't be represented but can be felt.